Orson Welles' first significant introduction to the public was a feature story in a regional newspaper headlined, "Cartoonist, Actor, Poet, and Only 10." That was only the start. From Everybody's Shakespeare done at Todd School in his mid-teens, to the Federal Theater project Voodoo Macbeth, which ran in Harlem at age 21, to the modern dress blank stage anti-fascist Julius Caesar at 22, and at age 23, the War of the Worlds radio broadcast that frightened the nation. It was a resume stunning enough to convince George Schaefer, the new head of RKO, to reward an untested novice. Welles got an unprecedented contract enabling him to write, direct, produce, and appear in his films. Welles arrived at RKO motivated by an urge to experiment. He was especially interested in a 1933 tycoon film, The Power and the Glory. Preston Sturges wrote that film in a form he called narratage, in which the narrator returns in voiceover as the story proceeds. The film opens with the funeral for an allegedly devious railroad kingpin, Tom Garner. His story is related sorrowfully by Henry, his elderly secretary and boyhood friend who adored him. But intercut with Henry's narration is that of Garner's wife, who despised him. Taking The Power and the Glory for a model, Welles remarkably intensifies this pattern of narration in Citizen Kane. Tom Garner was loosely based on the magnate who founded the Post Cereal Company. Of course, Welles and his screenwriter Herman Mankiewicz had their own kingpin in mind for their film. But from the beginning, Welles attempted to dissociate his protagonist from that famous figure. He told an interviewer in 1982, "Hearst was such a strange, underwater creature. I found him so repulsive physically. By the time the picture started, anything dealing directly with Hearst was entirely subconscious. We believed totally in Kane by this time. Did I visit San Simeon? Never." Surely, though, might not the estate at the film's opening be taken as a grotesque travesty of San Simeon? And what might the dopey-eyed monkey who welcomes us represent? Next comes a stunning magic trick from a show-off. An exact match from outside to inside the bedroom, including the reversed eye angle. A whispery rosebud. What is Rosebud? Of course, it's literally Kane's boyhood sled, said by some to be derived from screenwriter Mankiewicz's childhood. But what does it mean? People, viewers, writers, critics have not been shy about offering their ideas as to that. Welles himself famously told Dilys Powell of the London Sunday Times in 1963 that, "The Rosebud gimmick is what I like least about the movie. It's dollar book Freud." In 1941, the RKO publicity team suggested in the film's press kit that local theaters place classified ads with the cryptic text, "Rosebud? Ask Citizen Kane." Neither of his two wives ever knew. Maybe the point is that it doesn't mean anything. Welles told Peter Bogdanovich that the sled was Herman Mankiewicz's idea, and he couldn't come up with a better one. Welles said, speaking of the drafts of Kane, "Rosebud remained because it was the only way we could find to get off, as they say in vaudeville. It manages to work, but I'm still not too keen about it." Jerry Thalmer, longtime Village Voice theater critic, felt the opposite. "I remember to this day the impact on one young spectator, myself, at the first moment in 1941 I ever saw that workman throw that sled on that fire, and the Rosebud emerge in full, curling, crumbling flower. Speak of your shock of recognition. It was as if all the meaning in the world, all roots, all psychological truth, had been laid bare in one blinding flash."
I wonder, you put all this stuff together, palaces, paintings, toys, and everything. What would it spell?
Charles Foster Kane?
Or Rosebud? How about it, Jerry?
What's Rosebud?
That's what he said when he died. Did you ever find out what it means?
No, I didn't.
What did you find out about him, Jerry?
Not much, really.
Andrew Saris wrote that, unlike the conventional mystery key, Rosebud is the answer to a man's life rather than his death. And since the intangible meanings of life end in the mystery of death, Rosebud is not the final solution, but only the symbolic summation.
Mr. Kane was a man who got everything he wanted and then lost it. Maybe Rosebud was something he couldn't get or something he lost. Anyway, it wouldn't have explained anything.
Of course, there were always the rumors that Rosebud had a more salacious symbolic meaning. Henry Miller wrote in a letter to Aeneas Nin, "I have seen Citizen Kane a second time last night, and it seemed even better than the first time. Do see it. The part that concerns Marion Davies is very wonderful, cruel, terrible in its implications. And tell me what you think Rosebud means. I have a good clue myself." Wells himself once told an interviewer, "I knew that Rosebud was Hearst's pet name for Marion Davies' sex," then answered the interviewer's questioning look with an emphatic, "Her C word, her C word."
News on the march!
News on the March is a takeoff on The March of Time, a popular newsreel series made by Time Inc. and distributed by RKO Studios to movie theaters. The convincing combination of authenticity and boisterousness in the News on the March sequence is a result of the direct involvement of Ray Collins, who plays boss Jim Geddes in Citizen Kane, but who also served in a managerial position with the newsreel series. Not only that, Agnes Moorehead, Everett Sloan, and Paul Stewart had acted for it. Composer Bernard Herrmann says he took the score for the newsreel from the RKO files. The RKO newsreel team even edited News on the March, the only part of the film not edited by Robert Wise. Of course, what sets the film in motion is that the newsreel is unsatisfying, incomplete, not the full story of a great man's life. And the problems will be fixed when the reporter finds the answer to Rosebud.
Rosebud, dead or alive. It'll probably turn out to be a very simple thing.
Acts 2, 3, and 4, which are clusters of dramatic scenes, many featuring largely unknown Mercury performers, Moorehead, Sloan, Erskine Sanford, Paul Stewart, Ruth Warwick. But Rosebud remains elusive. Mercury Theater releases were identified as Orson Welles productions. When auteur theory became an obligatory mode in film criticism, Welles was called to account for his frequent references to such as Greg Toland and Perry Ferguson in Citizen Kane. He was enraged. He said, "Any feature film of high importance is a work of collaboration. But you must remember that the term refers only to those with high levels of creativity, not a dullard like Mankiewicz, but Toland, Ferguson, Bernard Herrmann. Also Maurice Siderman, a genius in makeup, plus several other fields. Maurice was denied credit because he didn't work within the system. I introduced him with a series of full-page ads in trade papers as the greatest makeup artist in the world." He had it both ways. More than meets the eye. At the end, when Kane's useless property is being thrown into a blazing furnace, a reporter approaches Kane's steward, Raymond, and asks if he can shed any light on the big mystery. "Rosebud?" Imagine Paul Stewart's ultra-sleazy voice. "I'll tell you about Rosebud. What's it worth to you?" And to a workman, brusquely, "Throw that junk in." At last, the film admits what it's been up to, keeping us in suspense for 2 hours over something that turns out to be next to nothing. It's been a wondrous display of stylistics, but does the film say anything meaningful? Albert Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus, which came out the year after Citizen Kane, provides a phenomenal context. The original Sisyphus committed a sin against his God and was being punished. The modern Sisyphus is an existentialist, driven only by himself and his innate desire to search for something outside, an essence. This essence is always beyond his capacity to discover. Hence his quest for life is absurd, though one can have a fleeting pleasure in daily experiences. Some truly monstrous phenomena are in range at the time of Camus' work: the war, the Holocaust, the atomic bomb, so that in the post-war era, the existential has in effect been converted to the absurd. Wells himself did use the word existentialist, but did not seriously profess to be one. In addition to whatever else, Citizen Kane is, at bottom, a sign of its times. But Citizen Kane kept pace with the times. First crowned the #1 film in the prestigious Sight and Sound poll in 1962, and again 1972, 1982, 1992, 2002, though perhaps a sign of the changing times, #2 behind Vertigo in 2012. Nevertheless, Kane was undeterred in its rise to the status of unapproachable, at least apparently so. Can life follow art? One evening in the late 1970s, a night watchman at RKO came across a pile of discards intended for the furnace, stacked outside the property warehouse on the back lot. On top of the pile was an odd-shaped item, its red shade barely visible underneath the dust. Aha! Could it be? He zealously rescued it and offered it for sale, but doubts about its authenticity prevented him from getting any substantial offers. Finally, the gentleman, whose name was actually Wells, believe it or not, sold it for $5,000 to an astute young man. This young man managed to authenticate it, including a statement from the RKO craftsman who had built it, sufficiently to convince Sotheby's New York to feature it at auction. Fastidiously ornamented and on its own rolling vehicle, it was brought out to oohs and ahs as a prologue. It brought even louder reactions when it came out for sale again as the last of 261 items. 10, 12, 20, 35, 48, 55, sold $55,000. The identity of the person who won the auction was revealed by a Southern lady on a payphone outside the auction hall who dejectedly told her Texas oil tycoon husband that they had been outbid by some guy named Spielberg.